Matthew Evans, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone behind the wheel of his sleek silver Mercedes, his thumb rhythmically tapping the steering wheel as he tried to keep his irritation in check. Despite the air conditioning doing its best, the sweltering Kentucky heat still managed to seep through. Having retired from a long and lucrative career in finance, Matthew had grown accustomed to life running smoothly in his favor. But today was different. With a flat tire and no immediate help in sight, he found himself far from the comfort of his expansive estate on the town's edge. Multiple failed attempts to reach roadside assistance left him with no choice but to wait. As his frustration simmered, a figure appeared down the road. A young teenager, maybe 13 or 14, walked steadily toward him, dressed in a worn-out t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. The boy approached with a purposeful look. Matthew observed the youth assess the car with a quiet intensity before nodding at him with polite confidence. Noticing the flat tire, the boy offered help without hesitation. Matthew, surprised but somewhat relieved, acknowledged the problem and explained his phone wasn't working in the area. The boy simply smiled and said he could take care of it, explaining that his grandfather had taught him the skill the previous summer. Matthew gestured to the trunk, and the boy quickly retrieved the tools he needed. His movements were calm and precise, reflecting a competence well beyond his age. Watching the boy work, Matthew felt an unfamiliar humility begin to stir. He wanted to offer the boy something in return, but the young man remained focused, finishing the job quickly and wiping his hands on his jeans with quiet satisfaction. When Matthew extended some cash in appreciation, the boy gently declined, saying he was happy to help and didn't need anything. Matthew was left standing in silence, the money still in his hand, as the boy turned and walked away, gradually disappearing down the road. The encounter left a deep impression, though Matthew couldn't fully explain why. He got back in his car, watching the boy's silhouette fade in the rearview mirror, and continued his drive, lost in thought. Back home that night, seated in his elegant study lined with books he rarely read, Matthew couldn't shake the memory. His dinner sat untouched nearby, and the only sound was the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Over the years, Matthew had met countless people, colleagues, employees, investors. Yet most conversations revolve around deals, leverage, and mutual gain. This brief moment, with a boy who wanted nothing in return, stayed with him in a way no business transaction ever had. There was always some kind of transaction involved, an expectation, a return, a condition. But that boy, a complete stranger, had offered his help for no apparent reason other than simple kindness. Leaning back in his chair, Matthew took a sip of his scotch, the boy's steady smile still vivid in his mind. He hadn't looked like someone who had much. His clothes were faded, his shoes worn, his hands marked by dirt and effort, but he carried himself with a quiet strength and honesty that felt increasingly rare. The following morning, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. He didn't fully understand it. Perhaps it was a lingering sense of guilt, perhaps appreciation, or maybe just a deep curiosity. But whatever it was, it compelled him to return to that same stretch of road, scanning the distance for any trace of the boy. Hours passed as he stopped at gas stations and roadside diners, asking about a young teen matching the description. Most people just shrugged or offered a polite no. Eventually, in a small roadside cafe, an older woman wiping her hands on an apron finally offered a lead. "The boy you're looking for sounds like Elijah," she said. "He's always lending a hand when someone's in need. Lives with his mother over in Harlan." Matthew repeated the name to himself, committing it to memory. Harlan was about an hour's drive, nestled in the Appalachian foothills. The road there was picturesque, but Matthew barely noticed the landscape. His thoughts raced. What kind of upbringing shaped someone like Elijah? What kind of home nurtured that kind of generosity? When he reached Harlan, the town was quiet, lined with simple houses and small storefronts. He asked around and was eventually directed to a modest home on the outskirts of town. The house looked worn but cared for, its front porch sagging gently with age. Matthew parked and paused for a moment, unsure of what he would say when the door opened. Taking a breath, he knocked. A woman in her early 40s answered, her expression cautious but kind, her gaze sharp as she assessed the unexpected visitor. Matthew apologized for the intrusion and explained that her son had helped him the day before with a flat tire. Her expression softened immediately. "That certainly sounded like her son," she said with quiet pride. She noted how he was always offering help when it was needed. Matthew expressed his desire to thank the boy properly, explaining how Elijah had refused any form of payment. She smiled and stepped aside, inviting him in while mentioning that Elijah was out back and he was welcome to wait. Inside, the home was humble, with well-worn furniture that spoke of years of use and care. The walls were filled with family photos and colorful drawings clearly done by a younger Elijah. It was a sharp contrast to Matthew's own home, which was filled with luxury and polish, but it held a warmth and sincerity he couldn't ignore. Still, there was something about the place that felt warmer, more lived in than anything Matthew was used to. He followed Elijah's mother through the back door and into the yard, where the boy was busy mending an old section of fence. Elijah glanced up, surprised to see the man from the previous day. "Hey there, mister," he said, brushing dirt from his hands onto his jeans. "What brings you out here?" Matthew gave a small, uncertain smile, realizing he felt unexpectedly nervous. "I just wanted to thank you again," he said. "You really helped me out yesterday, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Elijah gave a light shrug, his face open and sincere. "It wasn't anything big," he replied, but to Matthew, it had meant more than the boy probably realized. Determined to express that, he stayed silent for a moment, watching Elijah lean casually against the fence, his eyes curious and steady. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything, and Matthew felt oddly self-conscious, as though he were the one being evaluated. "I don't think you understand how rare that kind of help is," Matthew said at last. "Most people don't offer their time to strangers without expecting something back." Elijah tilted his head slightly, as if trying to make sense of the comment. "If I can help someone and I've got the time, why wouldn't I?" he replied simply. Matthew was momentarily taken aback by the clarity and honesty of that response. He glanced around the backyard, the fence patched together with different types of wood, the grass uneven, and in the distance, an old swing set leaned crookedly, its chains rusted and broken. It was clear the family had limited means, but they managed with quiet resilience. "You got a good way of looking at things," Matthew said sincerely. "Your mom must be proud." Elijah smiled and nodded toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to pitch in where I can." Matthew took in the boy's words with a kind of quiet reverence, memories of his own youth resurfacing, his parents working long hours to keep the family afloat, the values they instilled in him before he became consumed by ambition and financial success. Now, standing here, he felt something stir inside. Regret, maybe, or a sense of something he'd lost along the way. "I'd really like to do something for you and your family," he said finally. Elijah straightened, his expression wary but polite. "We're doing all right, mister. We don't need anything." "I know," Matthew replied, "but this isn't about needing. It's about what's right. You helped me, and I want to give something back." Before Elijah could answer, his mother appeared on the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, come in and wash up. Lunch is almost ready," she called. Then her gaze shifted toward Matthew. "If you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome. It's just a simple meal, but the offer's open." Matthew paused for a moment, unfamiliar with such a heartfelt offer, but the honesty in her tone left little room to decline. He gave a nod and quietly said he'd be glad to join them, stepping into the house. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. Though the table was modest, surrounded by mismatched chairs, it had clearly been arranged with care. Taking a seat, Matthew felt slightly out of place, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with the simplicity around him. Elijah returned from the sink, clean hands and that same steady smile. As they ate, Matthew found himself drawn into the rhythm of their conversation. Elijah spoke about school, his friends, and dreams of one day becoming an engineer. His mother chimed in with stories of their community, highlighting the strong bonds among neighbors and the quiet acts of support that kept everyone going. Matthew listened, captivated by the genuine warmth around him. Despite all his wealth and achievements, his own house felt colder and lonelier than ever in comparison to this humble home filled with laughter and connection. After finishing their meal, as they worked together to clear the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother and offered sincere praise. He told her she'd raised a truly remarkable young man. She smiled in return, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and resilience. She admitted it hadn't always been easy, but they had learned to find joy in the small victories. Matthew nodded, a seed of thought already forming. He didn't want to be intrusive, but he knew he couldn't leave without doing something meaningful for them. What this family had given him wasn't something material. It was a perspective, a grounding he hadn't known he needed. As he left their home that afternoon, a new sense of purpose filled him. This wasn't about offering charity. It was about recognizing integrity, resilience, and the quiet strength of a boy and his mother who faced life with dignity. Back at his estate, Matthew began making calls. By the next day, he'd mobilized a network of contacts, contractors, suppliers, former business partners. Plans came together quickly, and within a week, trucks began arriving at Elijah's property. Matthew stood out front, clipboard in hand, overseeing the work as it began. Elijah and his mother watched with disbelief as materials were unloaded. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky, insisting they had managed well on their own. But Matthew responded with sincerity, telling her that what they'd built together went beyond survival. It was something admirable, and it had awakened something within him. Elijah stood silently, watching everything unfold. Matthew crouched beside him and spoke softly, saying that what he'd learned from the boy had little to do with wealth and everything to do with presence. That helping meant being there, and now he wanted to be there for them. In the weeks that followed, the house was transformed. The warm porch was rebuilt with strong new beams, the roof was repaired, and the old swing set was replaced by a brand new one. Inside, rooms were refreshed with fresh paint, the floors refinished, and the kitchen fitted with modern appliances, creating a space that reflected not just care, but respect. At the beginning, Elijah tried to assist with the renovation work, lifting wooden boards and sweeping the dust-covered ground. But Matthew gently urged him to take a step back. "Right now, your only task is to enjoy being a kid," he said with a light-hearted grin. Even so, Elijah often found himself drifting outside to watch the activity unfold, his eyes glowing with interest as he observed the team measuring, sawing, and assembling. One of the crew members, a big man named Joe, noticed the boy's curiosity and invited him to help measure boards. It wasn't long before Elijah was eagerly asking questions about tools and building techniques, his enthusiasm catching on with everyone around. From a few steps away, Matthew observed it all, his chest swelling with pride. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered, something that extended beyond his own world. The boy's spirit reminded him of his younger self, full of dreams and ambition, long before life had narrowed into a cycle of meetings and market trends. As the sun set one evening and the renovation neared completion, Elijah's family stood on the refreshed porch, taking in the change. His mother turned to Matthew, her voice heavy with emotion, saying the place no longer felt like just a structure, but a true home. She struggled to find words to express her gratitude. Matthew gently shook his head and replied that it was he who owed them thanks. They had reminded him what really mattered: relationships, purpose, and belonging. On the final day of the renovation, the atmosphere felt festive. Neighbors stopped by, smiling and curious, bringing small tokens, freshly baked loaves, jars of jam, a potted plant. Elijah's laughter filled the air as he proudly gave his friends a tour of the new swing set and the revitalized rooms. The house, once worn and tired, now breathed with life. Matthew stood quietly on the porch, leaning against the solid new railing, watching everything unfold with a peace he hadn't felt in years. It was pure happiness, born not from achievement or wealth, but from witnessing others flourish. Elijah's mother approached with a glass of iced tea, offering it with a warm smile. She told him he had done far more than renovate a house. He'd restored their hope. And in doing so, she believed he had rediscovered something within himself. Matthew nodded as he took a sip, admitting that after chasing success for so long, none of it had ever filled him like this experience had. As the sun dipped lower, Elijah came to join them on the porch, still full of energy but thoughtful. Looking at Matthew, he said he'd been thinking about everything and hoped that someday he could do something similar for others. Matthew placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder and told him that he already had. His simple act of kindness had started everything. As the sky shifted into warm hues of orange and red, the three of them sat side by side, wrapped in a quiet sense of unity, appreciation, and purpose. When the time came for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's bright smile and his mother's teary eyes stayed with him as he drove away. It wasn't a conclusion, he realized, but the beginning of something new for all of them. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's growing interest in construction evolved into true passion. Matthew arranged opportunities for him to shadow the crew that had worked on the house, and the boy absorbed every detail with eagerness. As for Matthew, he found himself returning to Harlan again and again, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. The town no longer felt distant. He had become part of a story larger than himself. And for the first time in a long while, he felt genuinely fulfilled. It all started in a quiet town, with a single act of generosity from a boy whose simple kindness reminded an old man of life's most enduring truth. It's not what you own, but what you give that truly defines you.